I'm sure Ben will join us in a moment. Yes, Ben indeed is on the way. Hello, Ben.
How's it going?
Praise. 1 second, sorry. Praise the Lord. Thank God. I'm doing well. My son had a friends night, pizza, soccer, but it was just it was like 20 10-year-olds running through my house for a while.
Sounds exhausting.
So that was, it was a good practice for me, running up the wall. There was wooden floors, new painted walls, but it's all good. My son is happy. He has friends, and cleaning the walls. It's not a big deal. So yes, so I'm very happy about that. It was nice to see his interactions, and a good week overall. Thank God. People are healthy, so I can't complain. How about you,
Nice.
buddy?
Yeah, no, it's been a good week. Sometimes when it's not too interesting, it's good. It's good to have sometimes quiet and normal times. Just in the house.
Yeah, definitely went outside. There's definitely a storm going on with regards. It's like if you just even think about the Zelensky-Trump conversation, you're like, even thinking about it is almost like I can't even get into it. Like just like if I need to think about if as humanity, if we're being required now to try to analyze not only our own lives and the news and geopolitics and other wars, but also JD Vance and him calling him out for not buying a suit. You're I don't know. It's a lot. But that's why, thankfully, we are finishing the 5th parak today. We'll see, but I believe we will.
Yeah.
Which is very, very exciting. The 5th parak is really the we spoke about this in the beginning parak, where there's in the first chapter where there's the sort of the first 5 chapters, and then there's the next 3, which are separate. So maybe we'll do that, and we'll go into that when we wrap.
Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Thank God, Baruch Hashem. Family's doing well?
Yes. I mean, why wouldn't they be?
People get sick,
Yeah.
People have bad moods, and just checking in, making sure all's good.
All's good.
All right. So we're gonna hit it.
And read first in the English, or
I'm gonna read first in Hebrew, and if you'd like to read in English, you are welcome to read this first portion in English.
okay.
You ready for that?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm gonna take it first in Hebrew. וכן בדברי אדם כולם אין צריך שידבר בהם אלא במה שיביא לנפשו בו תועלת, או ירחיק חזק מנפשו, או מגופו, או בחוכמה, או במעלה, בשבח מעלה, או מעולה, או לגנות, או לגנות גנות, או מגונה, כי כללת בעלי החסרונות וזכרם לגנות, אם יהיה הכוונה בו לחסרם אצל בני האדם, עד שיתרחקו מהם ולא יעשו כמעשיהם, הוא דבר מחויב, והיא מעלה. הלא תראו, אמרו יתברך, כמעשה ארץ מצרים אשר ישבתם בה, לא תעשו. וסיפור הדומים וכל מה שבא במקרא מסיפור בנות בעלי החסרונות וזכרם לגנאי, ושבח הטובים והגדלתם. אין הכוונה בו רק מה שזכרתי לך, עד שימשיכו בני האדם אחרי הדרכים הטובים האלו, ויתרחקו מדרכי הרעים ההם. Take it away, Kirk. Well, Ben will set you up. And shalom, RJ. Go ahead.
Similarly, in regards to man's conversation, he should speak only of those things that will be conducive to the true welfare of his soul and body, or that will tend
a little louder, Kirk.
Okay. You need me to repeat from the beginning, or?
Yeah, you're sounding very low.
Similarly, in regard to man's conversation, he should speak only of those things that will be conducive to the true welfare of his soul and body, or that will tend to avert injury from them, whether his words concern themselves with science or virtue, or praise of virtue, or of a virtuous man, or censure of a vice, or of a vicious person, for to express contempt for those who are loaded with vice, or to depict their deeds as contemptible, if done for the purpose of despairing them in the eyes of the other men who may avoid them, and not do as they do, is indeed a virtuous duty. Does not Scripture say, after the doings of the land of Egypt ye shall not do, and after the doings of the land of Canaan? Also, the story of the Sodomites and all the passages occurring in Scripture which censor those laden with vice and represent their doings as disgraceful, and those passages which praise and hold them the good and high esteem endeavor, as I have said, to induce man to follow the paths of the righteous and to shun the way of the wicked.
To shun the way of the wicked. I like to shun the way of the wicked more. Shun the way of the wicked. Okay, so Maimonides in his classic way. Just even when he talks about dibur over here, speech, we just have to realize again, and we spoke about this in the past, Ben, as you recall, which is like unlike in Greek philosophy, right, which really, and even though of course Rambam also values the abstract thoughts, right, which is more elevated, Judaism specifically does emphasize, right, the unity between the physical and the abstract realms, right, which we achieve through speech. Right, so that's why he's talking about this dibur over here, which is just important to pay attention to, right? Like we speak a lot in this little corner about the logos as like abstract reason, right? But we see it as really the spoken word, right? Which is again, and other Christians see that as well, of course, not just Judaism. So again, it's important to remember that the speech really is something that is also very much a distinctive trait that we have, which is different than the animals, right? Which is like we can, of course, express ourselves. And that means we could, when we're expressing ourselves, we're many times at our best conveying very deep or spiritual or emotional meanings, right? And that's like very, very important. Now, I'm trying to think if we should do this. One more thing about speech, about dibur, which is also that if you look in the Torah, Rav Shirky also pointed this out. If you look in the Torah, that dibur, speech, is really, it's reserved for really very profound moments, right? Like you hear people speaking in the Torah, like Adam and Eve and the snake are speaking, but it's not dibur. You don't have that usage. The first time you see that actually is when Cain is attempting to speak for murdering Abel, right? That's the first instance of dibur. And it shows that like how speech, if it's not used for a higher purpose, can actually be like destructive, right? Like if you don't use your speech properly, ultimately. And really what Rambam is trying to like tell us over here is that when you're using your speech, right, it's not just if you have an effective speech, it doesn't only mean like what he says over here, which is like praising virtues, right, or the ganot, or condemning vices that you see, but it's also providing actual examples. See, like if you see someone doing something on the street, and it's very much as when we educate our kids, don't do like them, yes, do like them. These are things that we want to show people. It's not just talking about this, like saying like this behavior is nice. Explain this to a kid, or explain this even to adults. Like I want to see how it actually manifests, right? So and we spoke about this in Pirkei Avot, have mitavek be'avak raglahem, right? Which is like you want to be around these righteous people because you also want to see how they behave. Famously, there's the rabbi that would sleep under his rabbi's bed, right? Because he wanted to really l'shameshato, right? To be like, the squire is the wrong word, but really to like his understudy, his shadow, to really understand how this person behaves more than just how it's written, how these things are written in the text, but how they play out. Right. And he gives us over here, obviously, the stories that the Torah gives, like reward and punishment, right? Which you really learn these lessons. And he gives the example of Sdom. He gives, of course, the example of Mitzrayim, right? Which is the Torah is mentioning to you. I'm not just giving you allegories over here, but there's actually historical events that are really illustrating these moral behaviors and the spiritual truths that come from them, right? So when he's mentioning these things to them, this is the example, right? Look at this and realize this. And, these kochot nefesh, we have these strengths inside us that sometimes they really need, and this is nothing that, of course, that news that I'm saying, we hear this in this little corner all the time, but how being enchanted or stories really need to engage with different emotions and the imaginal. And of course, the Kuzari talks a lot about this as well. But how, giving these stories or giving these examples are the best way also for humans to be able to learn.
Right. That is how you use fiction as well, right? Or any kind of story, a narrative, is to be able to have something that is a little closer, even though it's still reading something, it's a little closer to an embodied experience. Because in a way you are, when you are given a specific example, when you see it, obviously it's one thing, and you're in the moment, it's more visceral. But also when you're reading about a particular example or seeing a movie and you're seeing the characters interacting with something, it's embodied in a sense that is less or more than theoretical, right? And it gives you, right? I think there are studies or people make point of people that read fiction have better emotional, can empathize better. Or I think also when you view certain things or when you interact with certain things, it can make changes in your brain in terms of neurons or a mapping of space and information in a way that's kind of like a little bonkers. But that means that when you collect stories, it actually makes changes in your brain that kind of affect of how you, even almost in an embodied way, affect how you perceive things.
Right, and this is touches up, but like with archetypes and like hyper truths and things like that, right? Which are stories like packed on top of stories that like really, this at some point it becomes sort of the operating system that you're looking at the world through, right?
Yeah.
Or Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, right? As we say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Kirk, any thoughts, complaints, demands?
Nothing particularly.
All right, we will continue on. וכשישים האדם כוונתו על זה העניין, יבטל מפעולותיו וחסר מאמריו הרבה מאוד, כי מי שיכוון על זה העניין, לא יתעורר לפתח הכתלים בזהב, או לעשות ריקום זהב בבגדיו הנאים. האלוהים אם לא יכוון בזה להרחיב נפשו כדי שתבריא וירחיק ממנה חוליה, עד שתהיה בהירה, זכה לקבל החוכמות. והוא אברהם, זיכרונו לברכה, דירה נאה ואישה נאה, ומיטה מוצד לתלמידי חכמים, כי הנפש תלעב ותעקר המחשבה בהתמדת עיון הדברים הקורים, כמו שיעלה הגוף בעשותו המלאכות הכבדות, עד שינוח וינפש, ואז ישוב למזגו השווה. כן צריכה הנפש גם כן להתעסק במנוחת החושים, בעיון לפתוחים ולעניינים הנאים, עד שתסור ממנה הנאות, כמו שאמרו, כי הווה חלשי רבנן מגרסהו, הווה אמרו, מילתא דבדיחותא, bedichuta. We discussed this. We'll talk about this again, but we spoke about this in the past once about laughter. ויחשוב שעל זה הצד לא יהיו אל רעות ולא מעשה הבל. רצה לומר, עשיית הפתוחים והציורים בבניינים ובכלים ובבגדים. Okay, wow. Ben, you want to take this, or do you want to read?
If Ben wants to read, he can. I'll read if he doesn't.
Sure, I'll take this one. If man has this as his ideal, he will dispense with many of his customary deeds and refrain from a great deal of ordinary conversation. He who follows this line of conduct will not trouble himself with adorning his walls with golden ornaments, nor with decorating his garments with golden fringe, unless it be for the purpose of enlivening his soul and thus restoring it to health, or of banishing sickness from it, so that it shall become clear and pure and thus be in the proper condition to acquire wisdom. Therefore, our rabbis of blessed memory said, it is becoming that a sage should have a pleasant dwelling, a beautiful wife, and domestic comfort. For one becomes weary, and one's mind dulled by continued mental concentration upon difficult problems. Thus, just as the body becomes exhausted from hard labor, and then by rest and refreshment recovers, so is it necessary for the mind to have relaxation by gazing upon pictures and other beautiful objects, that its weariness may be dispelled. Accordingly, it is related that when the rabbis became exhausted from study, they were accustomed to engage in entertaining conversation in order to refresh themselves. From this point of view, therefore, the use of pictures and embroideries for beautifying the house, the furniture, and the clothes is not to be considered immoral or unnecessary.
Big. First of all, you could see over here, echoes of Jordan Peterson, "Clean Your Room," right? Which you don't.
Or make it beautiful.
Right, or make it beautiful, or make this area beautiful, right? So,
so he's hitting this point. He made this point before, right? Of like, if you feel sick, look at a beautiful building, go spend some time.
Well, as far as using depression, right? Go exactly. So this is really, again, Rambam emphasizing like the importance of the aesthetics, right? Which is like, you got to recognize, and he's of course recognizing that there's, external motivations sort of can really shape our environment, right? And they could also influence our ability, ideally, to think clearly. And you could see, so first of all, by doing this, again, he's stressing that there's nothing outside of God's essence, right? His realm, right? So even aesthetics, if approached properly, right, with the purpose to attain wisdom, then of course you could do that, right? That's Rambam's like the most important thing, right? If you're attaining this wisdom.
Yeah.
And he's mentioning, obviously, if you have a disorganized environment, or I used this once in an article about like architecture and fashion, about like, your clothing have to be clean. And if you're in a place that could hinder your thought process or create like, your feng shui, your flow inside the house, it's very important that it's done in a proper way, right? This is also something that the Gaon Vilna would also, it was very important for him to have like a very clean house, and he was known to have a very clean house if you want to have a spiritual sort of, and for a spiritual environment and have like intellectual clarity. Also, it was very important for him to have that thing. And Rambam, if someone's interested, does explore this more in the guide to the Perplexed. The Gemara, the Talmud, also they discuss. In Jewish law, we discuss with regards to aesthetics, at least, that if you are, how far, like the regulations of how far you place the garbage, let's say next to a cemetery, or, you have to make sure you have a beautiful city, so you can't have the garbage like too close to the front gates. So the Torah also is already aware of this. And we of course, we know this. Gold doesn't matter to God, obviously, right? But yet we see in the temple, it's very important that there's a lot of gold elements, because there's a recognition, right? On the chest plate of the high priest, these are gems, because there's an appreciation to the aesthetics of the world we live in. Of course, right. There was the Talmud also mentions how one shouldn't focus on in diaspora, in exile, so to speak. People shouldn't be focusing on or rectifying their aesthetics, right? Because the idea is that your goal is not to stay there permanently. And that's not true to non-Jews, of course, but as far as Jews, the idea is to not invest so much with regards to aesthetics over there, because it's like an anchor. And there is these families in Morocco. This is at least what I was told back in the day, that they wouldn't plant trees or wear any green because it symbolized, let's say, the shrubbery and the foliage of Israel. And they're waiting only when they come back can that actually happen. Right?
Yeah, I've heard also stories of people like painting a wall. It might be like the eastern wall. They would paint it, of the house. They would paint it, but they would leave one like slice of paint.
Oh, we still do that today, right? But that's Zecher LaChurban, right? Because the temple is destroyed. So you still live in an area like that. I would say that Rav Kook famously spoke about how when they built the school, the architecture school, Betzalel, Rav Kook spoke over there and said how, the return of to the culture also of the aesthetics and the beauty. If you could start, if a country could get to that place, this is again like the footsteps of the Messiah, like, the Hebrews taking sort of being back in the land, taking back, going back to their roots and to their sources, and that allows them to express this true, Hebrew culture, which includes fashion and architecture and aesthetics. Again, obviously, are little hints of this happening.
I actually have a question related to that. In Judaism? So I don't know how familiar you are with like broader philosophy of aesthetics, but like in Judaism, is there a concept of the sublime that people I don't know if you know who he is, like Roger Scruton was an English philosopher who talked about this, and Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant and others. They had this aesthetic concept called
Sorry, Kirk, you were just cut off. Maybe it was Shami. Can you say that again?
I said there's many philosophers like Roger Scruton, who is a British philosopher of aesthetics, and Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant and others within Western philosophy. Is there a concept like that of the sublime in Jewish philosophy and aesthetics?
I don't know if there's like a philosophy around it. I mean, we're talking a little about it right now as far as beauty, but
Tiferet is like the only thing I don't know if that matches, or I wouldn't necessarily know what sublime it means in a technical term, but yeah.
I could check, look into that for you though.
Okay, yeah, I might look into that. Within like Western philosophy of aesthetics, there is a concept of the sublime, which is like, as I understand it, it's like it induces awe, but I forgot the exact specifics of it. But there might be something like that in Jewish sources. I just don't know specifically.
Noted.
So I think,
what's up?
Another point, and I think we're going to keep harping on this because it keeps showing up in different places and in our discussion, because the Rambam also brings it up, and it's also related to the parasha of this week, the Tzaveh, I think. Like you said, it talks about the bgadim, the clothing of the Kohen, of the priest, the high priest, and how he should be dressed. And so obviously there's a question. I don't know which commentators, but I've seen in a lot of different places of why do we need, why do we dress him up? Couldn't he just, they come up with something like, why was it so important for God to specify like this and this, he should look? And how does that jive with humility, for example? Right. So we were talking, and Rambam is giving a similar idea here, and also about other things, that in a sense the clothings are a compromise, or they are something that for the people it's important because they need to recognize, because it's important for people. Clothes are important for people, so they need to be able to see that the high priest is important. But if they were maybe on a higher level, the implication is that they wouldn't necessarily need it, right? And it's the same here, where it's like there's you can have it, but the implication is that you don't necessarily if you were in a higher level, you won't need it. But then again, there's this higher level that might be that you integrate it. Again, we could have spoken about it, but
Right, that goes back to the Ramchal talking about his different stages, right? So there's the Chassid, but ultimately there's the Kadosh, right? And the Kadosh, the Holy One, No, the Hasid, like the Essenes, retracts, right? I'm going to keep away from certain things, different restrictions, to get to a place where he's holy, ideally, where then he realizes how to embrace all these things, right? The Nazarite comes and brings a sin offering, because ultimately, while he reached a holy state, nevertheless, he had to deny himself from something, and that's not what God wanted, right? God created this world to be appreciated. We spoke about this 2 classes ago about Yilta, right? The famous example of Yilta and Rav Yochanan. There was something I was going to say. What was I going to say? Yeah, I saw Yon, so we were just, Yon God, I hope you're doing well and the family's doing well. But maybe we've mentioned this once in the past where you were in the stream, you're just also like in mathematics, right? Like there's concepts like chaos theory and like other, obviously there's different phenomena that people are more qualified to talk about, but they're not necessarily rooted in like causation, but they fundamentally have I would say, and people are welcome to correct me, I believe what's underpinning them is symmetry, right? And symmetry does act in the language of aesthetics, as far as like it does bring like a mathematical order to beauty, right? So like we know about this also as far as people being attracted to people. If there's like a symmetry after your face, right? People really enjoy that or attracted to that. Obviously in architecture and in design, I definitely feel that both when designing and also just the expression you get from clients, right? When something could just be like a little off, right? Or something's exactly right. I guess. So that's with regards to the aesthetics, even though we didn't cover the sublime. Rambam does, like we said over here, he does mention the laughter. And I said we're going to get into the milta de chuta. I'm sorry, I'm stuttering over there. It's just in Aramaic, and it's a longer word. So, right. So we spoke about this in the past, that basically how laughter helps us expand our capacity of acceptance. Really, it allows us to break through like different like mental limits at its best, right? So when rabbis would grow tired, it wasn't that there was like a physical fatigue that they would need, right? Because they could have said when they grew tired, why don't they just go take a nap, right? Instead, they would reach these certain, when it meant they get tired, they reach the intellectual sort of capacity boundaries, right? And then by laughing or by making a joke, this allows them to like break the mold and introduce like a new paradigm, so to speak, which in the Torah you could see as like Sarah's laughter, right? Sarah laughs because she hears something that is like, I can't even believe something that could be true, that I'm going to be pregnant right now. And by doing that, it's sort of the response was laughter, because it realized like there's a new reality I can now comprehend, right? And having this new understanding gives us joy, which I think many of us experience, like when we hear or learn something new or understand something at a very deep level. There's a sense of I don't know if we stop and laugh, but I've definitely found myself laughing at times.
Interesting. So I mean, laughter jokes is essentially breaking the mold, right? Like breaking,
but not moshav letzim.
Exactly. So I mean, in the Ramchal, we talked about it in moshav letzim or leitzanut, or like levity. But the function of laughter is still So it sounds like the function of laughter could be neutral, right? It can break the mold, and then you're stuck in this boundless place, and your morality goes awry, right? Because the jokes put you in this clown world, right? And if you stay within it, if you sit in it, like your whole world, you think that the joke is the world, which is kind of like what the Ramchal is saying the danger is. But here, the Rambam is saying that the rabbis would use that to just break the boundaries of their thinking, and then quickly use that reframe for study.
Exactly.
Cool.
Right. So of course one has to be careful how they use this tool.
Yeah. It reminds me of a classic, cliche, a classic trope, in movies where, somebody, there's like two characters and they're trying to figure something out and they can't figure it out. And then, like 2 minutes pass and then one of the characters says something completely off subject. Maybe it's even a joke. And the other person laughs, and then he kind of like,
he stops for a
second.
second.
Right. What did you just say? You said right? And like something in this thing that was completely off the mark, not related, like a word suddenly got them to solve some kind of mystery. I wish I had a specific example from a movie, but yeah.
Do you remember the TV show House, like House MD?
The what?
The TV show House.
I know of it. I haven't seen it though.
Oh, so like every episode, he would fall downstairs. He'd be like, "Stairs! No, the cure for cancer is like." It was just like it was very on the nose at some point. Yeah. All right, Himshachnu. This we read. Yeah, you scrolled back up.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Vidah.
שזאת המדרגה היא מדרגה עליונה מאוד וחמורה. לא ישיגו אלא מעט, מזער ואחר הרגל גדול. Right? וכשיזדמן מציאות האדם שזה עניינו, איני אומר שהוא למטה מן הנביאים. זה לומר שישמש כוחות נפשו כולם וישים תכליתם ידיעת השם יתברך לבד. ולא יעשה מעשה קטן או גדול, ולא ידבר דבר, אלא שהפועל הוא, או הדבר ההוא, מביא למעלה, או למה שמביא אל מעלה. והוא יחשוב ויסתכל בכל פועל בתנועה, ויראה אם יביא אל התכלית ההיא, או לא יביא, ואז יעשהו. Who's taking it? Kirk or Ben?
I can continue. Know that to live according to this standard is to arrive at a very high degree of perfection, which in consequence of the difficulty of attainment, only a few after long and continuous perseverance on the paths of virtue have succeeded in reaching. If there be found a man who has accomplished this, that is one who exerts all the faculties of his soul and directs them towards the sole ideal of comprehending God, using all his powers of mind and body, be they great or small, for the attainment of that which leads directly or indirectly to virtue, I would place him in a rank not lower than that of the prophets. Such a man, before he does a single act or deed, considers and reflects whether or not it will bring him to that goal, and if it will, then only does he do it.
Can you scroll down a little more? One second. Now scroll back up. וזהו אשר ביקש ממני יתברך שנכון עליו ואמרו ואהבת השם אליך בכל דברך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך בכל חלקי נפשך שנעשה תכלית חלק ממין לתכלית אחת לאהבת השם יתברך. Go back up. I mean, they're all connected, but I just think it's such trouble to the Almighty requirements according to the words. Okay, 7. Let's go back up. All right, whatever you could say there. Okay, so how should we go about this? Right. So again, classic Rambam. He starts with his classic saying, which is all about the knowledge of God. Right. We're going to keep on saying that again and again and again. Right. The apprehension of God, understanding of the divine. Well, not the divine, of understanding of God. And again, he concludes what we've mentioned in the past, which is a person really needs to ask himself before every action, right? Is this bringing me closer to God or not? Right. And there's, you could sort of see him, we could tease out 3 different people over here. There's we'll start from the bottom. There's what he calls in the Guide to the Perplexed and other places, the behemah, right? Like sort of like the animal, the beast, right? This is like the lowest level, right? This is someone who he's drawn really towards everything, even if it's harmful to them, right? And this is someone that is he just follows his desires blindly, right? And obviously he doesn't have any proper discernment how to make these decisions, right? Then we have the classic man, the Adam, right? Which is like this middle level over here. This is someone that he did have like even if I don't have an elevated consciousness, I still could have some sort of reason, even if it's in moderation, I could still discern certain elements. And then there's what he says over here, right? That this is a very high standard to achieve, right? To arrive at this perfection. This is what Rambam calls in the guide, in the Moreh, the guide to the perplexed, Elohim, right? This is someone that through his emotions and his speech and his aesthetics and even his humor, like we were talking about earlier, right? This person could still, it's all directed towards God. And such a person, Maimonides talks to him about like as an Elohim, right? Which is someone that really reaches this very, very high level.
Well, Elohim is like a person of authority, right? So it seems to be like he's also maybe using it in terms of like this person has authority over himself in a way that is complete or as close to complete as possible.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. I hear that as well. That's a good interpretation. By the way, we also see this in Samuel in the Bible study. The people that partake will remember that the witch of Endor, right, when she sees King Saul, right, she sees, I see a godlike person. Elohim ra'iti olem min adama, right? We know it's obviously not God, but she sees someone very godlike or very godly, right? And we spoke about how, according to Maimonides, really only 4 individuals read this, right? The 3 patriarchs and Moses are the only people that reach this level. We spoke about this last week. However, Rav Kook, in his classic fashion, it's a wider blanket, right? This generation, we're talking about people that have a higher potential to achieve higher levels of appreciation and closeness to God. And while they might not be like the patriarchs, nevertheless, they could still really attain like extraordinary levels of spiritual closeness and connectivity towards God. But so this, of course, leads us to a deeper understanding of what Maimonides talks about, which is his general philosophy, which is, the emphasis that we have towards a singular goal, right? Which is, as we spoke earlier, very heavily influenced by Aristotle, right? Who saw this as the ultimate pursuit, right, of wisdom. And this is sort of what I was reading on. We see that Maimonides goes further and he brings a verse from the Torah. Can you scroll down?
Yeah.
He uses this all to get to this point, right? He says this is all you have to be about. The Tanua you have to be to get to this point. But as Yaseh, right? He'll be able to discern and get to this point. The reason I laid out these 3 people is just to remind us of like these different individuals, because here he starts with the highest individual, right? Because he starts saying like this person, that's the Elohim already. But I'm just focusing right now how like all this ultimately we could say like a lot of this is coming from Aristotle. So the next pasuk is actually where Rambam comes and brings in, right, where he says like, such striving, right? If you want to do this, we don't have to necessarily do this through the idea of Aristotle, right? Rather, we have this verse, right? Let's continue reading this. This portion is over here. Thou shalt love thy Lord, thy God, with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might, right? That is with all the facilities of thy soul, each faculty having its role and having its sole ideal, the love of God, right? Which is, if you look at this though, 2 things. One, what he's doing over here, every time it says bechol, right? Every time we have this word over here, with all in English, right? This is really indicating that that every, like he's saying over here, that every aspect is is for the singular purpose. We could, of course, ask that Maimonides is talking about wisdom, and here we're talking about the love of God, not the knowledge of God, right? Here it says, right? You should love, right? We're not talking about you should know. So in the Sefer HaMitzvot, right, the book of the commandments that Maimonides writes, he talks there about how the love of God is really the pleasure that one gets when they comprehend intellectually, right? They get to these higher levels of apprehension, and that is their love towards him. Now, not to be so cold, if you look at that, if you truly understand someone, right, you could appreciate him in a much deeper level. So I would say it's not my mind is just sitting and making equations. It's when we talk about love thy neighbor like yourself, right? V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. If you truly understand him, you could truly appreciate him and you could truly see him, and then you could really love that person, right? Because you truly see yourself in him and vice versa. So it's just, I'm trying to give a warmer interpretation towards this Rambam movie.
That for knowing.
What?
You're trying to make knowing a little warmer?
Yeah, just knowing a little. I mean, I'm saying even the Rambam says knowing is the love of God. Like love is knowing God, right? So I'm just saying the knowing is more than just like reading your metaphysics. It's also
right. Yeah, I mean, you can make that idea with theory of mind, right? Like knowing somebody, having their theory, like having a theory of mind is being able to step in somebody's shoes, at least mentally. So you can relate that to again being empathetic towards people, and to predict what they would feel. You need to be able to step into their head and know them in that way, and that would require some emotional intelligence as well, loving them as well to an extent. I mean, if those are all things that could be related to each other.
Yeah, well, it's about. I mean, again, this is why only the person that would be dubbed Elohim could do this, right? Which is like even the loving one's wife and having children and loving those children honestly is because you recognize the divine in them, which is the divine in you, which ultimately is like the singular purpose, which is like this family unit is working together, or ultimately to unite with God. Right now, it's hard to always be thinking that, and hence we're discussing what the Rambam again. He's saying that very, very few people can reach that level. Of course, Rav Kook says, as a generation, more of us are there. But let's continue from the Kvar Hizhir. We said right, to love God. The Kvar Hizhir Navi, right, the prophets already told us about this. Right? ופרשו חכמים ז"ל ואמרו אפילו לדבר עבירה. Okay, big stuff. ורצונם לומר שתשים לפועל ההוא תכלית, והיא האמת, אף על פי שיש בו עבירה מצד אחד. וכבר כללו החכמים ז"ל, זה העניין, כולו בקצרה במילות מועטות מורות, על זה העניין. זה העניין, הוראה שלמה מאוד, עד כשאתה תבחן המילות, איך סיפרו זה העניין הגדול והעצום כולו, אשר חיברו בו חיבורים ולא השלימו, תדע שנאמר בכוח אלוהים בלא ספק, והוא אמרם בצבאותיהם, וכל מעשיך יהיו לשם שמיים. וזהו העניין באור נהר, וזהו הפרק, וזהו שיעור מה שראינו ראוי לזוכרנו הנה, לפי זאת ההקדמה. The end, I believe, yes?
That is, yep.
The end. Okay. What's our timing? Like 44. Ooh, Okay. So let's read it.
I'll just go through it.
Yeah.
This is the prophets similarly urge us on in saying, in all thy ways know him. In commenting upon which the sages said, even as regard to transgression, meaning of the ritual or ceremonial law, meaning thereby that thou shouldst set for every action a goal, namely the truth, even though it be from a certain point of view a transgression. The sages of blessed memory too have summed up this idea in so few words and so concisely at the same time elucidating the whole matter with such complete thoroughness that when one considers the brevity with which they express this great and mighty thought in its entirety, about which others have written whole books, and yet without adequately explaining it, one truly recognizes that the rabbis undoubtedly spoke through divine inspiration. This saying is found among their precepts in this tractate, and is, let all thy deeds be done for the sake of God. This then is the thought we have been dwelling upon in the present chapter, and what we have said must be considered sufficient for the needs of this introduction.
Okay, so we're only going to touch about it here.
Yeah.
People could explore more the idea of this kind of transgression, right? That could align with the divine plan, right? This is what Maimonides is, the Rambam is introducing us here to, and we sort of, by understanding this idea of like a transgression for heaven's sake, is really also realizing that there are trade-offs in the world, right? And each choice we make, right, it involves giving something up that's also valuable. There's examples you could see, biblical examples of this, of Abraham leaving his house, right? Leaving his father's house to go forth. He's on his whole mission, right? But what about respecting one's parents, right? His father's still alive, he's still with him, yet he's leaving.
Yeah.
And of course, famously, Joseph being sold by his brothers, right? Which is, even though it's like rooted by sin, right? Eventually, it serves a greater purpose. And that's also what he literally tells his brothers, that you guys wanted to harm me, but God had a greater plan. Now, one could argue and say like, okay, so what you're saying over here is that like, I could transgress and, it's for heaven's sake, it's all good. The issue is we can't, at the time of the transgression, we can't comprehend and know necessarily what what the outcome is going to be. And only once we repent from that action can we look back in retrospect and see like, oh, it's got us so far, right? So I would say that I'm sure there's alcoholics that love where they are right now, and in AA can look back at certain things, but they have to be removed in theory from that situation to appreciate where they've come, right? And only once the brothers in the Joseph story repented can Joseph actually tell them that this is what he actually feels. So this is very, very, very difficult.
Right.
Now
maybe it's worth just. And you gave an interpretation, like a lofty thing, also just like to the Dvar Avera, for the transgression. But I think also it might be worth noting, like it says in the footnote here, is that there is an interpretation, or the English already gives this interpretation of like this refers specifically to ritual ceremonial law. So if it's something, so it doesn't give you a carte blanche to like do whatever, like the means don't justify the end. But if you need to break the Sabbath which is breaking is a transgression in order to do something good, then that's something that might be valid, or it would be valid. So yeah, there's different ways of looking at this if people are trying to.
I think that's a very good point, Ben, because again, we have to caution against misinterpretations, right? We're not saying that you should use this concept to justify sinning. Right. And we're not saying that, we know figures like Shabtai Tzvi and others that obviously caused a lot of damage with ideas like this. And that's why, again, like it's really about understanding that this sort of the greater good can be achieved only once you detach yourself from that sin. There's a famous story that I've spoken about in the past in these circles about the story of Moses' death, which is a fantastic story. But there's a whole dialogue back and forth with God, and every time God gives a reason to why Moses is dying, Moses has like some answer back for him, and it gets like very intense. It's very dramatic. And ultimately, God responds to Moses saying, like, it's time to die because you killed the Egyptian, right? When he saw the Egyptian hurting the Israelite, you killed him without my divine permission, right? So, the weight of the action that you took, you weren't thinking about it, right? So Moses counters him and says, like, what do you mean? Like, you killed all the lives of the firstborn of Egypt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now God replies back to him that I take life because I have the power to give life and restore life, right? So at that moment, Moses is silent and he dies. And you could interpret this based on what I was saying, which is once Moses realizes, like, first he was thinking that, like, I killed the Egyptian. That's also part of the plan of, like, punishing the Egyptians, right? So, like, why am I not part of the plan? Once God tells him, like, no, dude, there's, like, yes, I'm punishing them, but even them too, like, there's the concept of a resurrection also that I could play with. Moses then realizes that he's still connected to the sin because he hasn't fully understood the greater good that God had in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And once he did that, once that realization happens, his soul could finally come back to God. Again, it's a beautiful, beautiful story how that happens. That was really, just with regard in correlation to our story over here. But really, what he focuses on over here, which is interesting, is how impressed he is, if you noticed, with the summarizing of what the sages did over here, right? Which is they condense, like, this complex idea, right? That all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven, right? And he loves this, right? Because his attitude is, and this is a dig at Aristotle, right? He writes the whole book of ethics, and here they do it in 5 words. What's more impressive later on is Solomon, right? He does this as well, but he's almost in Proverbs, right? We said
before, not later on.
What do you say?
You mean before Solomon does it before either Aristotle or
right? And he does it in 3 words, but he's a prophet, right? So
right.
That's how he was able to do this. But again, the ability, what he loves of here, the ability to distill, right?
Mm-hmm.
These concepts.
Yeah.
He's super impressed with this, and we know how impressed he was with Aristotle, right?
Mm-hmm.
He understands that because of this, it says that they must have had this divine inspiration, right? The Ruach HaKodesh. Otherwise, how did they compress so much in so little? And one more thing about when we say Shamayim, which means sky, but many skies, it's like in plural. But in Hebrew, we spoke about this, how Shem is like Leshem, for what, right? What's the purpose of something, right? When something has a name, it has actually its purpose that it's fulfilling. And this really is our task, is to unify all the different options and the various paths, right? And unify them towards, like, a single goal, right? So we're supposed to take all the different Shem and make Shamayim, make what, like, make the multiplicity and unity equation over there.
Interesting.
So having said that, we just spoke about how, and this is what I started today with, how, the Rambam really divided, and this is also to RJ, so listen in, into 2 different sections, right? We have the first 5 chapters, which are like focusing on the, let's say the foundations, the underpinnings of morality. And then the chapters are really like additional moral questions, or it's like an appendix sort of to the early discussion we have. But RJ wanted to have a discussion, or not a discussion, he wanted to do like a summary of what we spoke about. So I thought that getting to the 5th chapter is a good time to do this. So in the first chapter, we spoke about the Achdut HaNefesh, right? The unity of the human soul, right? And that's really about, you could have thought there's, multiple different conflicting souls, so to speak, or how people taught it's really one unified soul, and how important that is for moral behavior and responsibility, right? Otherwise, I could say, like, oh, that was my anger soul, that was this soul. Really, all my actions stem from one source, and I have to take responsibility for those things, which leads us to the Perek Sheni, the 2nd chapter, which was the concept of free will, right? So obviously, I need free will to be able to make decisions. And the argument is that because I have free will, I can make decisions between good or bad, and then I could take accountability for the things that I'm doing, which segues into chapter 3, which let's say we could call the discernment chapter, right? Which is, now that I have the free will to choose between good and evil, how can I discern between good and evil and different moral behavior and how I'm going to do these things? And last chapter then is chapter 4, would be, if I made mistakes, how do I rectify these imperfections, right? Or what we talked about, the netiyot, I'm leaning towards certain certain tendencies. How do I rectify these imperfections in my soul, right? So we spoke about that. And then in this chapter, in the 5th chapter, I would say we spoke about the mountain, right? The summit, the life goal, right? Which is like, what's the ultimate goal we have, and unifying our goals. They should align with God's ratzon, with God's will, ultimately. And this, I would say, highlights why it's important for us to have a moral goal that highlights, our direction sort of in life, and how we live a moral life as well. And now we're going to move into 6, 7, and 8. One of them is a doozy. I think 7's a doozy, but it's going well.
They're all a doozy.
Yeah, they're all. No, I think like 1 and 2 weren't so bad. 3 also, I don't think is so bad. 4 or 5, man. For 5, this guy was huge.
Yeah.
4 was also huge. Yeah, but the Rambam had a lot to say. I don't know. He could have distilled it, into three words.
Only 3 words. Yeah, I mean, maybe he didn't want to compliment himself too much. Hey.
Exactly. Next week we're on, right? Purim's not the problem.
No, yeah, it's Thursday, Friday.
Yeah. Correct. Thursday, Friday.
Pesach will be off.
Pesach will be out. Yeah, but maybe we can I don't know. Maybe
I'm going to be in New York too with family, so I probably won't be able to.
I'm saying we'll be close to finishing it by Pesach, but we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see. Once we get to chapter 7, we can start thinking about what's next. But maybe we'll do the tefillah, the prayer thing on the blessings of the Shema and all the standing silent prayer prayers. But we'll get there. We'll see. Ben, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kurt,
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
What did you say?
I said you said wait. What you said? Take care.
I said take care, but if you have a question, feel free to ask.
Well, I was just saying. Oh, I just said take care back. Unless you have some side to schmooze or really got to be going.
Schmooze for a minute.
Well, I just haven't talked to you for a while, so I'd just like to know how life's going for you personally.
Life personally has been good. Just a lot of thinking about exile, redemption.
Yeah.
The
Israel-related stuff.
I'm sorry?
You said Israel? You mean like Israel-related stuff?
Israel-related stuff, the things that are happening in the world, the ultra-Orthodox Messiah, light things like that are weighing on me.
I've recently, as you know, I'm interested in like philosophy as well as a little bit of sociology and anthropology. And recently I've been looking into a fellow named Zygmunt Bauman, who is a Polish Jewish sociologist who talked about these things. And also, like, although I personally disagree with him, and you'd probably disagree with him as well, but also like, also listening to more, like, you could say Zionistic voices like Sholem and others. And I mean, in general, do you think that Israel nowadays, do you think they should do anything with regards to like, other than like what you've proposed in the past about trying to like mend relations with you could say the Arab world? Do you think there's anything they can do to like do with assimilating? You mentioned the ultra-Orthodox. Do you think there's anything you can do with like assimilating the Israeli public and the ultra-Orthodox together and making it more like seen as like a not religiously fundamentalist or like not literalist country?
Yeah, but that's it's a loaded topic.
I don't mean it to be. It's just
Yeah, I'm saying so. Yeah, there's. I mean, I'm an optimist. So yes, I believe that there is a path. Difficult though. There's a lot of pressure. So I'm saying the time is strike while the metal's hot, so to speak. But you have to do it with the right hammer and the right speed, and I've yet to identify, and maybe I'm wrong thinking it's like individuals that could sort of pave that way, but there's ways to I don't want to say like assimilate because it's too mature. Everyone, the whole country needs to mature. Really, that's really the answer. The answer is we need to manifest. We're called Jews when we leave the land. In the land, we're Hebrews. And until we embrace that identity and return to being Hebrews, so it requires like a general maturing of everyone, which in turn will allow the ultra Orthodox to feel more comfortable and lower their guard. I don't want to say lower their guard, but feel more comfortable to return to some sort of balanced life, as we were talking about in Maimonides over here. But for them to do that, it requires an emergence of a religious sort of spark and affinity in the population, which is happening. If I end up talking about this with PBK, I'll probably discuss it also there. But there's also definitely since the war, there's a crazy increase of just of people just getting religiously more observant, stronger, more connected, spiritually more connected in all different ways. But you could also see it in like the musicians, the fact that many of them are not playing on the Sabbath. Many of them are wearing, tzitzit. Many of them are making more blessings. Even the fact that, Bibi Netanyahu, who is, for all his faults, still one of the most, let's say, sly politicians out there. Okay. And very, very much aware, or historically has his hand on the pulse of his people. He's never been there. You've never seen a picture of him with phylacteries on. However, recently, the last few months, he did. And that's because I don't know if that's happening for heaven's sake, but he is reading that that's what the people of Israel want to be seeing. Okay. I'm using that as a data point where he's also reading the room and saying like, this is what they want to see. They want to, it's a whole population that's getting much, much, much closer to God. And you, of course, see this even in the stories of many of the hostages that came back. So I think Israel and definitely the observant Jews who are interested in this need to build an infrastructure that's going to accommodate, I believe, a huge spike in growth in people that want to connect. And the question is, how are we connecting with them? And this is a larger conversation that I'm having with Jacob and Yosef. But I'm sorry if I'm rambling. But like I said, it's a lot.
I understand. Yeah, I mean, I just think that most Jews in the diaspora don't. I don't know if Jews in the diaspora see Israel the way Jews in Israel do, or at least non-Orthodox Jews in the diaspora see.
I'm sure they don't. If they did, they would be here.
Well, there's that, but there's certainly some diaspora Jews with the Israeli mindset. Not many, but I don't think you can
I
rule it out.
mentioned this. I mentioned this in last week's weekly portion review. Wasn't such a review because it was a very messianic speech about redemption. But in it, I said that King Solomon tells us in Song of Songs, right, that I finally come to the door, right, in this dance between God and us, or Israel and us, and I come to the door, but God already left, right? You have to think about redemption is this is like the first date, or this is the main date, really, with the love of your life. And you could be early, but you definitely shouldn't be late for the date. And like diaspora Jews, in my estimation, are risking being very late for the date. And I part of me feels like that's what we're also sort of, in a certain sense, even witnessing, which is, I mean, there's a lot of tensions and specifically, I'm talking about world Jewry, less about, let's say, the unaffiliated Jews, but they see that all in their own denominations, whether it's Reform or conservative, but even in the Orthodox. And what ails them subconsciously is they need to return to the land.
Yeah, I just think there's like, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but I get a feeling, or I intuit from my experience with others, that the way non-Orthodox or former conservatives in diaspora, especially older, but even younger Reform and conservative Jews in the diaspora, see their place in the world. As Jews, they definitely like identify with Judaism, but unlike you could say Orthodox Jews, there's not like for a lot of them it's more like they go through it as a routine or as like a cultural affiliation, but they haven't done much like, I don't want to generalize, but many of them I don't think have done much like in-depth theological or philosophical, you could say, or hashkafic introspection about like their understanding of God or but
I would agree with you wholeheartedly. That is the case. Yes, you can generalize because that's generally true.
yeah.
And as Kirk says over here, as RJ says over here, Kirk, you can ask some of us, buddy.
I know, but I'm not speaking about you, RJ. I'm speaking about the community as a whole. Like, if I say that, I'm not saying that like every non. Of course, everybody individual is different. I'm just saying like a lot of people within these affiliations tend to have just a different way of approaching life than Orthodox Jews do. It's not a knock on them. It's just it is what it is now. In terms of what that means for like the future of Israeli relationships with the diaspora. I don't know if I can make any pronouncements about that. I just don't know. But I do think if there's going to be some sort of push of the Jewish community globally to move to the state of Israel, if there ever is like a mass aliyah, you are going to have to see like a more discussions or more conversations being had within the Jewish community about what being Jewish is all about.
Yeah, and I think people need to feel comfortable. I was seeing this podcast, I forget which one it was, but this guy was talking about how people need to feel comfortable talking at Hillels in university about Shabbat for an hour and not need to fill it with, let's say current political stuff or explain how it has to do with some sort of woke ideology. And many of them can't because like they don't know much of the Torah's sweet honey Torah secrets. But there's a revival.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to recognize is that like each individual is different, but like I think one of the things is like the way to approach each individual during these types of conversations, whether it's about Shabbat or Torah or whatever really you're talking about, is like just remember that everybody's understanding of the world is going to be shaped by the culture they're socialized in, and so like if somebody is say born in say Reform or considered Jewish household where it's to them primary just about like going in and enjoying the music on Saturdays and having your thing on having a private life outside of that that's not really observant, that person is just not gonna. I
Kirk, we
broke up
lost you.
for a second. Sorry, I just I got a call. um what I was going to say is that person just doesn't have the same understanding of the relationship with Torah practice as somebody raised in like a Haredi community in Israel, or even a modern Orthodox community in Israel, who's goes to yeshiva at during high school and is socialized, and to them being Jewish is all about observe every mitzvah. So, I mean, but like the question I guess I would have to you, I guess, because I guess I'm sort of not necessarily repeating myself, but just kind of harping on the same point. Maybe to put this in the form of a question to you, Hezi, because perhaps you might have a recommendation of this. How do you think, as an Orthodox Jew, people who have more of a Torah mindset should approach Jews who are like strongly identified with Jewish identity, but don't really have a Torah mindset? You could say.
With love and open arms, and invite them over to your Shabbos table and just learn with them. That's all you need to do. Don't judge. I just don't think that's necessary anymore. And I don't think people need to feel guilty. I just think you need to. You're asking me like practically how it's done on the ground.
Sorry, you broke up for a second.
I said that on the ground, how it's done practically. Why I have many opinions of like, it's there's different reasons why they don't know enough, and we could blame different institutions. The way Orthodox Jews should interact with Jews from the diaspora, or specifically non-affiliated Jews or less observant Jews, is just see them as your brothers with open arms and open mind, and speak to them and see them where they're coming from and speak their language. Diaspora Yid is joining us for a moment. What's up, RJ?
But RJ is actually more observant than many non-diaspora Jews.
So yes, I think we should calm rhetoric, how we talk to Jews like this. I also think, I've spoken about this often. There's a term in Orthodox circles called off the derech, which means off the path, right? If someone is not as observant, or everyone has and each community has its own Overton window, but once you're past it, right, you are off the path. And I think we should really see a much wider path, and it's very, very difficult to get pushed off, find yourself removed from this path. And we have to look at that also in a historical context of what is the standards we're giving ourselves. A lot of the, again, very, very complicated conversation, but in the ultra Orthodox community in Israel, which is heavily influenced by this group called Hayashuv Hayashan, right? Which is like the old country, sort of.
The pre-Zionist Jewish community?
Yeah, correct. They specifically saw themselves as sort of like elites inside the observer community, and kept a more strict and segregated lifestyle. And this is something we spoke about in Maimonides, where this is not really recommended. This is just the action of like very few people. Yet this became mainstream. Now there's plenty of blame on the secular Zionists
side, yeah.
that due to the influences in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when Western culture started permeating inside, and bikinis and mini skirts and
all these things.
This basically, up until a certain point, even Ben Gurion, right? We always like, oh, he knew the Bible, and he started this. Like, even the non-observant Jews we were all Jews. There was Yiddish. The culture was still very observant, even if not practiced as much on the ground. 60s, 70s, 80s, you have now like a like you have a secular person that's really a different breed at that point, and then the ultra-Orthodox community said like, okay, we gotta take a step back, right? So then, because initially they were joined in the army and they were working, and there were pictures of women in all their magazines, and it wasn't an issue. Once they decided to observe a much more abstract that really started. It was really, if you look before him, there's Rav Kahanaman, but he had the Israeli flag in his yeshiva, and there was an appreciation for the country. But
just to clarify, when you said Shach, do you mean Eliezer Shach? Am I correct?
I didn't hear what you're saying.
What was that? I meant,
yeah, go ahead, say it again.
I meant, do you mean Eliezer Shach? Is that his name?
Eliezer Shach, yeah.
Yeah, because I forgot his name, but yeah, it is Eliezer or Eliezer Shach, and he was like a Haredi. He was a Haredi rabbi.
He was a Haredi rabbi, yes.
Yeah, I mean, of course, these discussions are very nuanced, and there's a lot of like conversation and empathy that needs to be involved. It's just like the main gap is that socioculturally speaking, people who get accustomed to, you could say, easier lifestyles are less likely to be self-correcting, and it's a lot easier to live your life as somebody who's when in terms of practice, basically just a regular American, but goes to Shabbat services sometimes, or goes to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services, and it is to like fully dedicate yourself to being a part of a Jewish community, full-time observant, full-time, have all your family marry Jewish people, observe Shabbat, observe Yom Tov, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you want to connect yourself to eternity or not? You don't have to be connected to eternity. If you do,
well, it's not a question about do you or do you not have to. It's that according to Jewish ethics, you ought to observe the Torah because the Torah is God's will. Now, if somebody doesn't, they have the free will to do that, and nobody's going to force them, or there's no bet din that nowadays, after the destruction of the High Court in Jerusalem, has the authority to force. But it's not a question about force. It's just a question of about like encouragement, or like how do we accommodate people with regards to these things.
Yes, but the encouragement is because, again, it's very important that reward and punishment in Judaism shouldn't be seen as, like you did, like, there's the man in the sky that's giving out gifts. Should really be seen as midah keneged midah, right? Which is, how do I say that in English? You are rewarded. I don't know why I'm blanking on it. You'll excuse me because it's late. I'm just translating this for a second. Because it's an important one. No. Sorry. It's going to be like something very simple. You're like, oh, of course, this, right? Measure for measure. There you go. Okay. So the measure for measure is, right, if you put your hand in a boiling fire, right, it's going to burn, right? If you do certain things, we're not doing Gad's calculation necessarily, but there is an appropriate response as well. So you're right. They have free will. We were just talking about it in the chapters we were talking about, right? There's just free will. And then once we realize this free will, you can then decide with tools of discernment how to make your choices. And there are many options, right? If you need to do that through the aesthetics, if you got to do that through humor, but ultimately that's the proper orientation. And if you're living in a world where, like, I could spend, very few time thinking or contemplating God, even if it's going to temple, right? We spoke about this, b'chol drachecha te'eu, in all your ways known. When you're making that huge sale in the real estate office, or you're playing in court, if you're litigating in court, like, what is the underpinnings of who you are and why you're doing these things. And that's so at all times you could be observant, and it doesn't mean putting on phylacteries necessarily. It also means that down the line, and those are tools to help us manifest those things, remind us of those things. But in the way you drink and the way you talk and the way you joke and all those ways, you're supposed to be emulating him. And there, what would be the quote unquote the excuse, right? It's not. I'm not asking you even the dietary restriction laws, but like, are you? And this is what we were talking about. Even in transgressions, they should be leshem shamayim, for heaven's sake, right? Which is like, even if you are like, the question is, if all your mode is towards God, it's less about, I would argue, which I'm sure is controversial, but it's less about specific commandment A or B. It's more about if the whole mindset is oriented towards God. RJ, what's up, dude?
Maybe RJ has
Shalom.
something you can say.
Shalom.
So, Kirk, I figured I'd hop on to see if you had any questions for me as a diaspora yid that I've glad that I cracked a smile on Hezi.
But the group of diaspora Jews I'm talking about are specifically like
From Tampa
typically.
Bay. No.
Well,
No, I got you.
It's your David Wolpe's. It's your proud conservative and reform people who Jacob would call heretics, and you know who I'm talking about.
No, I think I get where you're coming from, and I think I appreciate where you're coming from and your interest in these things. Kind of going back to some of your questions from before, is kind of seems to me you're trying to place some of what you're seeing here in Maimonides, in the canon as of other things that you've read, and kind of compare them. I would always recommend, when you're reading through any text, just kind of like take it at face value, see where it's trying to lead you, and then take a step back. So, as part of that, taking a step back, it seems like you're curious as to some of these tensions you're seeing in the Jewish community, and how that might get worked out from one side or the other. As someone who has not moved to Israel, I could offer some of my side, as it were, and kind of offer where we see some of the tensions, is if that's your curiosity. But it's those tensions themselves that is kind of what's Rambam's referring to as the perplexed side of life. So I think, I'm happy to have some of those conversations, but you may find me just kind of saying, maybe sit back, wait, and observe a little bit. And I don't mean that as a cheat, but it's good to have these kind of conversations for people who are kind of waking up and saying, I don't have a rabbi to go to ask, or there's nothing on the internet. So I guess fire away for a few seconds.
I mean, it's a lot easier to learn via dialogue than it is just to look something up, but at least for me. But like, yeah, I do think if I ever want to learn more about these conversations, there's a whole library of resources I can access outside of here. But I'm just curious, RJ, from your perspective, to my saying, you told me that you were raised conservative.
Yeah.
In your assessment, do you think in your experience with conservative Jews in America, do you think they generally have a good understanding and grounding for what Israel is like?
For the most part, no.
Okay, fair enough. And do you think that this is a result of education or media propaganda or political influences or something else?
Most haven't spent a lot of time in the country. Those who have and liked it move, to Hezi's kind of point a little bit. There's the thing I'm trying to draw your attention to is there's people who are anchored here in the diaspora, and then there's a new trying to let go of that is something that's very difficult, because you're presenting people with, how am I going to live this life in this new place, and what
Which
is
is
that
less
mean?
comfortable.
Right. It's actually, I would go far as to say it's uncomfortable.
I mean, again, I could talk about a lot of like pros, obviously, down the line, where I think but definitely from like a Western perspective, and from many times like a affluent perspective, it's difficult living in this country, culturally, monetarily. So it's tough. My argument is though that it's still easier than ever period before, ever, ever to do
Yes,
it.
there are
So
fewer
again, it goes
people
back to
wrapped in
like,
metal looking to lop off our heads for hanging out and building a house. That's very true. That's an excellent point.
um, yeah, I mean, like again, people moved in way worse situations than this, of course. Um, but I would say and this is an argument Jacob and I have often, and this is Jacob's platform, and we just mentioned that Jacob does not, agree with.
Jacob Fiorucci does not neither condones or accepts any
No, he
any views.
condones
Not
Zionism,
what is it? Yeah,
and all the good stuff. If you're here, you know.
Yeah. I
And
think
yeah,
I was just gonna say I think so. Like the conversation about Zionism and anti-Zionism is my perspective on it. I'm not saying this has to be anybody else's perspective, but the way I see it is this: 90% of people in political conversation who are not in Jacob's corner use Zionism to refer to anybody who's generally supports the state of Israel, and anti-Zionism to try to speak to people who oppose the state of Israel. Jacob, politically speaking, supports the state of Israel's right to defend itself from Hamas and has supported its efforts at existing as a Jewish state to protect its citizens. Most people would call him a Zionist. And so while he has the right to call himself an anti-Zionist, I think it's sort of a semantic thing. And like the fact that he wants to hold on to labels so much, in my opinion, it just doesn't, do much for like people who don't understand the context. But yeah,
thank you for the clarification.
I mean, unless you have something to say or
I
agree with
I
that.
think he's I don't think he's a Zionist, like a secular Zionist,
Well, he's
or
not a Zion. I mean, he's not a Zionist in the literal historical term of
correct,
supporting
but
the
he's a
Zionist movement. But you don't need. But here's the thing: in the political conversation of 21st century American Jewish culture, if you support the state of Israel, then most people will use the word Zionist for you, just as a
No,
linguistic
I
thing.
understand how you're
but
explaining it.
let's take a step back, Kirk, because I'm curious as to what your overall interest in some of these questions are, because like there really is a way to look at the guide without having to consider what you're applying it to. I'm not. Yeah, so what, like, what's the overall interest in whether or not someone approves or disapproves of the like the political organization, and or whether or not you're in the land or not? Like, I'm just curious as to what you're looking to learn.
I'm a Noahide, so I'm curious about Jewish culture and Jewish community issues.
Hmm.
I mean, that's it.
Great answer.
If I was a Christian, I'd probably be less interested in it. But
You'd be surprised.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I would say all Christians should be heavily interested in what's happening in the Holy Land,
well,
because
yeah, that is true. Many, especially the evangelical discussions about that.
it
But
directly affects them. I mean, it affects everyone. That's the name of the game.
Hmm.
That
I mean,
is,
setting aside what's going on in the territory for now, I think returning to what does it mean to live and act with Jewish values, is certainly a ever alive question. Um,
yeah,
so it is
but it,
affected by being there and in a community or not. For those of us who are not born in Haaretz, you know, there's certainly the question to move, but there's certainly the question of, like, how do I continue to, what does it mean to be Jewish? What are some of those ideas? How do I live honestly and authentically to those, um, even if my primary address isn't in Israel? And I think there's a validity in that identity, so to speak, which I don't, which is to say, I don't think you're a bad Jew for not trying to move to Israel, and I think a lot of people share that viewpoint, but it's certainly challenged because then it's like as I mentioned before, you're kind of anchored somewhere, and what are you anchored around, and how much do you want to be around? How much do you want to assimilate or not? It's still a very a difficult question. Whether you're assimilating people into Israel or assimilating people who are Jewish in wherever they're at, it's a challenging question, and it's one I think the guide has a lot of answers for. So that was my 2 cents.
Yeah, again, I go back to the analogy of the date, right? Do you, like, if you think, you're still like in the texting phase, then I guess you're going to stay in America. But like, nah, I'm setting the table and I'm making sure the flowers are there. And that's, I sort of, from my reading of Jewish text, it seems to be very clear to me that is a requirement. I understand that, and this is also true about Israel, when people think about like red herrings, like a halachic state, right? Like a theocracy. People get very scared what those ideas mean, like, oh, Israel's going to turn into Iran, and it's just like a kindergarten level of understanding Judaism. And this is what happens when the deep, rich, and obviously is a beautiful emergence of this right now, Chassidut, and by now I mean over the last 70 years or so, but it took a very long time for these other aspects of Judaism to surface in a grand way, and it obviously has to do with Gutenberg 1.0 and 2.0 and the internet, all that good conversation. But and to the conversation of Cook saying that now we're on the level of like we're all perplexed, right? And if we're all perplexed, we need a different kind of Torah to answer that. And because as we see in the guide, he doesn't respond to his student that's perplexed with tiny little Sunday school answers, right? He answers with very, very difficult answers and very profound answers. And inevitably, a relationship, if we could move all from being perplexed to being, what would be the opposite of perplexed? You'd be certain, I guess. Well, I understand you're not looking for certainty, but to be in this comfortable space, once passing through that perplexity period, right? I would argue at that level of realization and manifestation as a people, the commandments will seem different, and there will be potentially different requirements to that kind of population. Perhaps some things will be more stringent, and perhaps things will be more lenient because of how the population reacts as well. And it's a living Torah. We're only invited to play with the Play-Doh if we're playing nice and we're all playing together, right? But if you go into kindergarten, you're kicking and screaming and you're yelling and you're pulling, so that you don't get to play. And, it's the best game in town. And connecting to sort of how the country manifests and why it's like also relevant now is because it's always been the conversation, right? The Jewish values. But the Jewish values ultimately are supposed to be displayed to the world on the grand stage of nationhood. That's the name of the game. That's what's promised to Abraham. That's when you come to the land and you pick a king because you're going to look around you. If you're going to want to play the game that everyone else is playing, right? I heavily believe that a lot of the hate, this is going to be controversial, but a lot of the hate that we're getting, the anti-Semitism we're getting specifically about this war, is because I would argue that you saw an insane level of evil occur, right? Where it would seem to be clear who the good guys and the bad guys are, yet Israel's seemingly stuttering and not knowing how to react to that properly is the common day. It allows the world to point to be like, you're not those, you don't have the moral high ground. You're not those special people, because like it's sort of the world. And I've said this often, like either disappear or be glorious. And sometimes being glorious, and I would argue, and this is what's controversial, like responding to evil in a harsh way is necessary sometimes. And I would argue that the world also wants to see that and can't say that because of a Christian ethic and because of many other reasons, and are desperately waiting for us to stand up and be those people that we're supposed to be. But we keep fumbling.
Yeah.
So I think we're definitely working towards being those people. I think going back to, trying to figure out and be a little bit less perplexed takes some of these conversations. So Kirk, if you ever have any questions about that, you know how to find me more or less.
We are on Discord.
Just go outside and yell his name for 35 to 45 minutes.
No,
Someone will come. It might be your parents.
I'm sure we can connect, but
we got Discord, and if you ever want to talk on there,
right. I think I'm just gonna leave off and say, look, there's a lot to still. Let me go back to something that Jacob said. I think just the other day, which is that yes, that's exactly going to be my final point.
Wait, what did you say, Hezi? I couldn't hear.
Nothing. It's a silly joke.
Jacob was talking about how at the end of the day, the Tanakh, the 5 books of Moses, are kind of above everything else.
You mean the
and
Chumash?
Everything.
The
What was the question?
The Chumash.
Yes.
You mean?
Yes. We get everything from there, and everything flows from there, and that's what connects every Jew to every other Jew. We may have different understandings about how to live up to that, and that's going to be something that we work out in different generations and in different places and in different ways. And being disconnected on the ground certainly makes that a challenge, and I think that the internet can be a place where we can try to reconnect and answer some of those questions to whoever's asking them. So that's my last 2 cents for the day, and hope you have a good one.
First of all, thank you, RJ. And my last 2 cents will be that that book is shared by our Christian and Muslim brothers as well, right? They're just also have their own interpretations of how to understand the prophet Moses. And I would say that learning from our Muslim brothers, because we're in the Ramadan period, and they should all have a Ramadan Kareem and easy, and those in Lent should also have an easy period. But in Judaism, usually you're considered observant. If you don't fast on Yom Kippur, you're not observant, right? If you don't keep the Shabbat, you're not observant. And in Islam, in Ramadan, you don't eat. But if you need to eat, go behind the curtain in the kitchen and eat. And it doesn't make you not observant anymore. It's on a spectrum, so to speak, right? You're still considered Muslim. No one's be like, oh, now you're not. And that's something that maybe we need to learn how to adopt a little, again, of finding more room and being more understanding at a certain level and seeing people on the spectrum, as long as them being less observant, or we'll call it light, is not the ideology, right? Christian light or Muslim light or Jewish light, if it's an ideology, it's a problem. If it's part of a journey, then I think it should be treated differently with more respect and understanding.
Yeah. Well, that's
and with that, I bid you adieu.
I bid you too.
All right, cool cats. I am going to catch you guys later. I'll leave you in a minute. Thank you all for joining. I hope you guys got to learn something. I don't know. I'm raining it to Cal. I'm asking Cal if he's enjoying these streams, or does this sound very foreign to him? To be honest, I never really spent time learning the Rambam. The yeshivas I attended focused exclusively on the Gemara, whether I picked up was on my own. I definitely enjoy. And even though I may not agree with everything, it's okay that you don't agree, as long as I hope you know this L'Shem Shamayim, for heaven's sake. Yeah, that breaks my heart. That all your focus was, first of all, that's generally the focus, right? In my yeshivas, right? The morning and afternoon and night were all focused on the Talmud, on Gemara. Morning and afternoon being in depth learning, and night being, I would say, we're just trying to gain more ground at that point, and more surface level. But you must know, Cal, and now that you must know that you know that can't be the end all be all, right? Learning the discussion that happened in exile. I was very against, when I was teaching in this yeshiva, focusing, only on the Aramaic, especially if it was difficult for some of the students, because it's just not the point. Yes, in some occasions, the Aramaic specifically, reading it in the Aramaic gives nuance to the teachings, and the context, of course, matters as well. However, the focus on it is boggles the mind. In Maimonides, close to 1,000 years ago already told you it's not necessary to read that, right? I've distilled it all for you in my books. Now, of course, we understand the intellectual reward by learning the type of learning with Gemara, and jumping back into that time machine and all that discussion. It's fantastic, but in today's day and age, we need to engage people with different Torah. I mean, it could be it's not either or, right? We could be doing this additionally, but there has to be less of a focus on it. Even just the Bible, like so much there. Yes. Broaden our horizons. You gotta expand and broaden those horizons all the way to see the dawn of a new day in the land of Israel, buddy. That's the next step. That's sort of what I was discussing. I alluded to, maybe mistakenly, and now I'm doing it again, to RJ, sort of about there not being one Messiah, but being four Messiahs, and how the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in this interpretation of the four Messiahs, would be identified as the Menachem, the Menachem ben Chizkiah Messiah that is discussed in Sanhedrin, in the Tractate of Sanhedrin. Right there, they have a discussion of the different names: Shiloh, Yinon, Hananiah, and Menachem. And on Menachem and the Lubavitcher Rebbe is really, it's sort of the culmination, the peak of diaspora exile Jewry. And by doing so, by getting to this point where like there is no dynasty as so grand, and their influence was insane, and the Rebbe himself, what a phenomenal person, and that way, and in that way, you could say that yes, he is one of the Messiahs, but he signifies the end of exile, which I'm sure Jacob, if he's hearing this, you don't have to send this to him, anyone, but I'm sure he'd have conniptions hearing this. But by doing this, I could also say that he is the Messiah. He's just not the only Messiah. And he's definitely not the Melech HaMashiach that Maimonides talks about. That's a different Mashiach. It's more of like a political leader. The Breslov, Rav Nachman, and others talk about a different Messiah, one who plays music, Yinon. But again, maybe it's for a different discussion. Here, there you go, RJ. You're still here. You heard a little bit as well. If you want to read into it again, you could look in. You could look in Jeremiah and Ezekiel and in Yeshaya, in Isaiah, and in, like I said, in Sanhedrin, there's a discussion about these four different names. Which interesting there isn't a rebuke of one another. They're not saying, no, you're wrong, or you're using the wrong verse. It's sort of they realize, you could read into the discussion that they realize that these are different aspects or different options. We also see this when the famous idea of king, the Talmud tells us that King Hezekiah could have been the Messiah, and Nebuchadnezzar could have been Gog and Magog, but it didn't turn out that way. And that would lead us to think that there's always a potentiality also of Messiah in every generation. But we gotta be prepared, right? We gotta be there for the date. We can't be late. All right. I'm not sure we see the mission that way. I guess that get into Because I need to be kind of what are you doing? I mean, yes, there's the Zohar talks about this a lot, that you could be like the Messiah, but you'll only know the moment you need to know, right? So it is a question whether he was cognitive at the time, right? Now you could say like he wasn't, but everyone else was, right? They're telling him you are this dude, and I don't think he saw. I disagree when you say I didn't see his mission that way. I thought he also sees. I see him as the exiled Messiah because he didn't come to the land, right? Crazy that the Rebbe was never in Israel. And he had his rule, if I come, I can't leave. But there was sort of to be like, I can't leave, but I'm here to signify the end of this, right? So I must stay here to be able to push this idea through, and be the symbol to these people. Again, it's just, guys, what do I know? I was thinking I was thinking it wouldn't be there for you. It wouldn't be there for you. Yeah, but one second, Cal. Yes, I agree with you. However, in the end of the day, it's happenstance that it's in Aramaic because we were exiled there, right? If it was in France, it would have been different. And then if I'm paying $27,000 to have my kid come and learn for the year, right? If half the year he's struggling to understand what's going on in class, does that make sense at that point? Or like, yes, so maybe the focus should be like in these areas. Yes, you should read it with Aramaic, understand these key terms. But now, weiter, right? You got to learn through this and understand the sugya, because the sugya and understanding what's happening around it is what's more important. The fact that it's in Aramaic is only one level. So like the Tzurat Hadaf. Again, you have to realize that sometimes these are the shackles of the exoskeleton of exile, right? Like we're allowed, like they weren't learning Gemara in the temple, right? And they weren't speaking Aramaic at the temple, but yet they were experiencing a beautiful, robust Torah. Even their discussions were beautiful and robust. And there's also the Yerushalmi Torah, Talmud. Obviously, we go according to the Bavli, but we're back. Let's do more, learn more, explore more, take it to the next level, baby. Bonkers. You could be saying like in retrospect, now that it was in Aramaic, it was like divine that it happened. I disagree. I mean, clearly it's like a sister language, right? Which allowed it to be absorbed easier as well. But I think it's more important that, let's say, the nigun of learning, right? The trop. That's very important, right? To get into that stance. I think and again, like I understand that there's key ideas that are very important and concepts and terms. But like you said, it's circumstantial. And right? It could be that like this mind could be melded in many different ways, or develop this Jewish mind in many different ways. But then there's also what do we want to do with this Jewish mind? He could be very connected to Chassidut, and then like he could build a beautiful Jewish life and flourish without necessarily diving deep into the Gemara. So we need to be just, again, careful with what we say, like this is the main event. But we agree. Gematria. That's above my pay grade. The divine code, that and excuse me for a moment. Cal, I'm with you, but even what they're leaving out, it's only because they were in Babylon that that's the language you're using. You could totally learn. By the way, this is inside baseball right now, people, so I'm sorry. But Cal, you are correct that if one is learning from a translated Gemara, I would never recommend he start with an art scroll, just because the amount of translation they do over there and interpretation they do over there is really you are correct that it detracts from the beauty of the the puzzle, which is learning a Gemara page and really hunting and understanding and digging and cross-referencing to get the beautiful picture of the Gemara. But there are translations like Veshinantem, right, which maintains Tzurat Hadaf, which is visually very, very important, right, the actual page format, and does very little translating, right, and doesn't give you the whole historical background. So there, within translations, there are some that are better than others. Yeah, but RJ, what Cal would say is yes, but there are hidden treasures on this mountain, which I agree with, right? There's a certain even if it's just the pacing of this shuckle that I'm doing right now, what Jacob mentions to me when I do it, that's part of that pacing, right? So when you learn a Gemara page and the back and forth and getting yourself into that mindset and to the again sort of the music of the Gemara is important. And you can, with many books today, you could lose that. And listening to a Talmud podcast in your car is not the same. Oh, Cal, you know that's for sure true, right? Like, I'm looking at right now my son's Gemara quiz, right? He's 10 years old and the questions that he has to answer, and then you realize it's not going to be it's going to be a hill for him because he's dealing with this now. But if that's not your life, and if you think that that's how you need to connect to Hashem, you have to connect through that, or that's one of the primary ways to connect to Hashem. That can be very, very daunting and even give people chalishut hadat, right? Weaken their resolve. Home again, home again. Cal, that's the point, right? He's in the stream of, he wants to get closer to the Eberster. That's it. Not defined by labels. But Cal, you too are invited when you're in Israel next, please God, very soon. Come for Shabbat. Come visit. Come say hi, man. RJ, same goes to you. I don't know if you guys know Rabbi Malot, who frequents Jacob's channel. Actually, he wanted to send his daughter over for Shabbat to our house. It didn't end up happening, but I wonder what she would report back to her dad. Im Yirtzeh Hashem, if God wills it one day soon. It's co-creation, man. You got to buy that ticket. All right. Guys, this is fun, and I'd love to continue, honestly, but things to do. With the help of God. Yes, Bezrat Hashem. In all, if you're writing like a little letter or anything you write really, you always write on top, Besad, Besyata Dishmaya, with the assistance of the heavens. It's something that's like so grained into us that like even if you're just like writing something random, many times you'll just scribble on top just Besad, the acronym. Good night.